When I was in my early 20s, I noticed that I was constantly spending as much money as I was making. And it was super frustrating for me because I always felt like when unexpected expenses showed up, like I needed new tires for my car, or I needed to have some extra money to maybe even go on a trip or something, that money was just never there. And I kept saying to myself, well, when I make more money, I'll have more money. I just need to get paid more. But then as I went on into my later 20s, I noticed that I kept getting paid more money. My salary kept going up, but my bottom line didn't. And I just never seemed to have that extra money in my bank account at the end of every month or when I needed it for those unexpected expenses. And it was around when I was about 27 that I started reading Susie Orman's books and watching her videos. And for those of you who don't know, Susie Orman is sort of like the original money guru. Like, she just talked about how do you be more purposeful and intentional about how you spend your money, have more consciousness about it, and really just opened my eyes to seeing how I was managing my money in my life in a completely different way than I ever had before. And what was kind of funny is I worked at that time I had been in banking for a bunch of years before that. I was working as a controller for an international training company. I mean, I knew about money and about managing money and profitability, but what I started to see was that it was something that I did outside of myself and I was not applying to my own life. And, I had just gotten married and I was wanting to be able to eventually buy a home before we had children or by the time our kids were little. And I knew that I needed to do something different if that was ever going to become a reality. And it was her listening to Susie Orman that started to open up my eyes that the problem wasn't how much money I was making. The problem was me. And that I really needed to start to have a different relationship with my money. I started to notice my mentality about it was there was money in the bank, so it was okay if I spend it. And it was out of that starting to pay attention to and really notice, hey, where am I spending my money, that had me start to have more responsibility about my money and start to have more of an awareness about the choices that I was making with my funds every month. I started to treat putting money aside for that house that we wanted to buy so that it became part of my intentional process of how and where I was going to spend my money. And that practice really completely shifted for me my relationship with money. And, it was a budget of sorts, right? And a lot of times when I talk with people about budgeting in their businesses or in their lives, a lot of times it can feel like it's a restrictive thing and it can feel like it's a controlling thing. But the exact opposite happened for me. I found that when I started to be more mindful and intentional about how I was planning for my future and planning for my profits and planning for our future home that I wanted to buy, I felt like I was in way more control of my money than I had ever been before. And I felt much more powerful about how I was managing my life and our finances. One of the things that experience brought was this ability, as I started my own business a few years later in the early 90s. When I started my business, I started incorporating that practice into my work with clients that wanted to make more profits. And I was like, how do you be more intentional and purposeful about being profitable in your business? Well, you plan for it. And so how can we plan for it? Well, we do a budget. And I don't just mean the kind of budget that is numbers that show up on a piece of paper and then you don't look at them. I'm talking about numbers that you have a relationship with, that you look at regularly, that you manage against. Because for me, when I was, way back when, I kept tracking where I was spending my money every month so that I could see how I was doing compared to my plan. And that's really the key for you, is that if you want to make more profit in your business, you want to plan for it and you want to track it. So let's talk about a few different ways that you can do that. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you what's some ways that you can start to do that for yourself. And I'm going to show you some tools that I am going to share with you in this video. So one of the tools that you can see here, this is a budget goal sheet. And what this budget goal sheet is, and again, this is a tool that I'm going to share with you, but it starts to have you start to think about what are some goals that I have for my business for this coming year. And this video is coming out in October, and this is the time of year that I do this type of planning with clients, where I encourage them to look up and go, what are you going to do next year in terms of revenue, gross profit margin, net profit? How much money do you want to have in cash reserves, right? What's your financial plan for your future? And then what are some of the things that you want to take into consideration that are going to impact that plan? So this operating budget goal sheet, you'll see, has a series of questions. One of the first questions is, what's the revenue that you want to make? What is your gross profit margin that you want to be making for the year? Now, one of the things that I always talk about is gross profit margin. Contractors live and die by gross profit margin. So it's a super important number that you want to be tracking within your business, and you want to set a goal for, and you want to manage against. And then the next goal is, what's the net profit margin goal that you want to have for the year in your business? A good number to have is 8 to 10% net profit after your payroll included in that number. And then 10 to 12% is great. And I would say that those percentages apply up to a business of about probably 20, 25 million. After that, you might notice that that percentage is going to go down, but it depends on your business and your business model. But those are good benchmark goals for you to go for. And then what's your cash reserves goals for the year? You always want to have a cash reserve goal for your business. Ideally, a good standard is 3 to 6% of your overhead expenses in cash reserves. So that's 3 to 6% of your overhead expenses in cash reserves. I didn't make up that number. That's just a good industry standard. I would also say that that's true about your net profit margin as well. And then what are your personal earnings for the year? What are your goals for how much you personally want to make? Now, if you're a corporation, your salary should be included in your overhead expenses or your G&A expenses, general and administrative expenses. If you're a sole proprietor, then that net revenue goal, net goal of how much profitability and how much your salary is, it's going to be way higher than 10 to 12% because that's also your salary. So being intentional and planning for even just this group of numbers is one of the ways that you can start to plan for profitability in your business and plan for being intentional and purposeful about how you're going to be making money and planning for money. And one of the interesting things is that you'll notice I started with revenue and then net profit and then your salary and cash reserves. When you set all of those goals and you've decided that's what my intention and goal is for the year, then what you're going to find is that it forces you then, when you start to plan for how much money am I going to spend in my business, what my costs are going to be, it sort of forces this conversation of, all right, how do I be more purposeful, intentional about where I'm going to spend money in expenses? So I recommend, and then you'll notice there's a number of other questions that influence how much, how many employees are going to get raises this year, how's that going to influence my pricing, how I bid work, how much my overhead expenses are, organizational changes, any new services or products, just things for you to think about as you're planning for doing a budget for the next year and planning for profitability. How do you incorporate some of those and think about some of those questions, as well as just planning for, do I have equipment needs in order to be able to replenish some of the equipment that we have that might be breaking down, or that I need to invest in because we're growing and we're going to need to add more equipment or trucks or what have you, and how much are we going to have to borrow against that? So this planning worksheet there's a link down here at the bottom of the video that you are welcome to use and to start to do the planning for your own business in this next year as you're planning for profits. One of the ways that you can do that is to do an operating budget for your company, to be more intentional and purposeful about how and where you're planning for spending money. And then I recommend that every month you look at it, just like I did way back when, in order to be able to save that money for the down payment on my house, is to look at your actual results compared to your budget and see where you're on track or off track and make course corrections every month to keep you on track with where are you compared to where you want to be. Doing all of these things, just planning for profits, one of the key ways to do that and to increase the profitability in your business is to be intentional about it. Do an operating budget and plan for how much money you want to make in your business and how much you want to make personally for yourself. I hope you found today's video helpful. If you're ready to take your next step in your leadership journey and to build a great contracting business, I encourage you to check out my book, The Profit Bleed. And for a limited time, you can get my book for free. And you simply need to go to theprofitbleed.com/free. Thanks again for joining me for today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Profit Builder.